You're familiar with the military, and you're probably familiar with mediums. Well, on this episode of Survivor Angels, I am going to be visiting with the military medium. Stay tuned and find out more.
It's time for Survivor Angels, an approach to strengthen trauma survivors. Here, you can escape what draws negativity and engage your positive abilities and the gifts that you've always had. Let's activate your angels. And to help you on that journey, here's Chaplain Jodi.
Sitting here with me today, we're at the Michigan Paracon, is Dean McMurray. Many of you know him as the military medium. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about, so this could be really interesting. So stick with us on this one. Welcome, Dean.
Thanks, Jodi.
So
It's great to be here.
for those of you with a point of reference, since I'm from the Midwest, Dean hails from Fargo, North Dakota. And
North Dakota. You gotta put in the North Dakota.
Right. And so he already has a warm place in my heart because of that.
It's a hop, skip, and a jump from just down the road from you, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
well, and actually, I am a Minnesota native, so I was born and raised in northern Minnesota, so in a little town called International Falls. So that
the coldest
is
places in the
yeah,
nation.
well, yeah, great. Yeah, go from one place, the extreme to the other. So,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, absolutely.
Right. Dean has served in our services 24 years?
24 years in the Army. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for yours.
it's what we do. We're
Right.
called to do
right.
it.
So,
He is also an ordained minister, and then he discovered that he had some other gifts. So why don't you kind of explain to our listeners and viewers how that came about?
yeah, absolutely. So, as you shared, did 24 years in service. Almost 15 of those years was active Army, and then I came over to the Army National Guard, and that's what brought me to North Dakota, was the Active Guard and Reserve program. And so in the last 3 years before I retired is when everything started up for me spiritually, so to speak, and it was, kind of part of my story of when my deceased grandmother came to visit me, and the way that I described myself back then was I was the very atypical male. Jodi was the most woo-woo conversation my wife and I would have is what kind of oils we would diffuse, or she would just I don't know, put on that Christmas tree stuff, it smells nice, or what's that orange stuff, right? So, and as far as mediums or things like that, I wouldn't go there, and because simply my mind couldn't. And I always knew there was something more. I was, I know a lot of people ask, well, how were you raised? Were you raised in a very spiritual home, or and I was very traditional Midwest upbringing. Go to church on Sunday, Easter, all that stuff. But when it came to ghosts and talking about spirits and everything paranormal and spiritual, it wasn't discussed. It was kind of interesting in later years after I came out of the closet, so to speak, the metaphysical closet, as we like to say, it was kind of interesting of the some of the things that I found out about my family that I wasn't even aware of. And some of their abilities, and I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy, But yeah, in as I was sharing, in the last 3 years of military service, right before retiring is when my deceased grandmother came to visit me, and it was a experience that I still remember like it was yesterday, and it really set me on a course of going, why me, why now? And that was 13 years ago, and here my kids at the time were 5 and like 1, and I was thinking, Dad is going to retire, he's having a midlife crisis, and oh my God, I can't. I was going to work for the VA. That was my plan. That was Dean's big plan, was to work for the VA. And I was like, I can't afford to have a midlife crisis. And here I was in my early 40s, and I was like, trying to figure out what this all meant. Why me? Why now? And so I went on a journey of, trying to figure out what all this meant, or what it was. And so I went to a local psychic had been coming over to the home during this process to try to get all the paranormal activity, because it was clocks and pictures. It was part of the whole experience of the ambiance of our home at the time. It was quite a from the frying pan into the fire type deal.
Yeah, you got the whole package.
Yeah, the whole package. I mean, I got the VIP experience. And so we were having this psychic come over, and she didn't do anything for the clocks and pictures flying off the wall, but she did, Jodi, start connecting with my grandfather, who was a World War I veteran. And I was like, nothing against Grandpa, but how the hell is he here? And I was like, where was Grandpa after Bosnia? Where was he after Korea? Where was he after? And for me, going through my list of deployments, where was he in my life up until now? And she quite honestly said, well, I don't know, but she said, I can answer you that he's here now. And it was almost like Charlie Brown's teacher after that, because it was like the wah, 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 wah. And because I wasn't listening to her, because I was focused on, why is he here? Mm-hmm. And I wasn't listening. And so, it really did nothing for me, quite honestly. But it wasn't until later, when my grandmother, his wife, came to visit me, who I was very close with, that it sent me on that course searching. And I went back to that same psychic, and she was the only one that I knew in that realm. I didn't travel in those circles at that time, and I said, I need to figure out what is going on. And she goes, Dean, you're a medium. And I said, you are full of shit. And she goes, you know what, Dean, you're probably right. I'll take that. But she said, honestly, that doesn't take away from the fact that you still are a medium. And I was like, what does that mean? Other than, and I'm internalizing this question, and I knew what psychic medium meant, mm-hmm. but what did it really mean for Dean McMurray? And so, I was like, well, she said, read this book. And she recommended John Edwards' book called The Infinite Quest. And I still recommend this to anybody and everybody that's kind of in it, because John very plainly asks people why they want to be a medium, and, just writes in very plain language. And I remember reading it, and every chapter, why you want to be a medium? And quite honestly, I was like, I don't. And I slammed it and I threw it across the room. And then I picked it up a week later, and finally I went back to this psychic, and I was like, I read your damn book. I was like, and I was so frustrated because it asked me over and over again in the book why I wanted to be, and I didn't. And I said, and I expressed my frustration, and she said, well, let's take a moment and figure that out. And I was like, well, good luck. I'm thinking, because my mind was wrapped around, I was beating myself up just trying to figure out, damn it, what is the answer? And so she led me through one of my very first meditations, if you will, and it just clicked. And I was like, well, holy shit, that was easy. And she said, well, what is it? And I was like, well, it's to serve others. I said, it makes sense. That's why I joined the military.
Right.
That's why I'm led here, mm-hmm. even though it's not my course or the way that I would do things. But I was like, because I've always wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, right? And so, the aspect of that is, because you can help so many. And that's always been my tagline, to help others heal one connection at a time. Mm-hmm. However that is, whether it's, having a conversation or doing a reading or whatever that is. And so that's always kind of been my mantra. And going forward. But from there, it was like, okay, well, great. Now I'm a medium. I'm like, oh shit. And like, so what do I do with that? And I was like, so I had to figure out what being a medium meant for Dean. And I was like, and I joke, I still remember this, Jodi, is like, I was like, why, or, am I going to be given readings in my basement? And I think one of my guys was like, yeah, you're going to be given, and in Ubers and in, hospice units and wherever you're asked or guided, led. And, who would think that I would be sitting, in a convention area speaking with you, like about talking about being a medium or anything like any of this. And I would have, if you go back that many years and have to say, Dean, something tells me that in 13 years you're going to be at, paranormal. I'd be like, you're full of shit. Like, and so quite honestly, and because I was just in that mentality of, I just couldn't see it. And, so it's kind of interesting, the evolution of things, the people that you get to meet, like such as yourself and other folks, and the doorways and opportunities that you get to experience is really humbling. And
it's very humbling.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes you got to pinch yourself. I know I do that. It's like, holy shit, I get to do that? Like, this is my life now? Like, I could never do that before. Like, the freedom. And
so have you used any of this as part of your military experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think you mean drawing back on the military? Oh, absolutely. I think, I don't think once you, at least for me, once I put on the uniform, I don't feel that I can fully take it off. It's an integral part of who I am. It made up the first half of my adult life.
Right.
And after 24 years, I just can't walk away from it. It's part of my DNA now. And so, and which is fine. I'm totally, blessed to have that experience. And do I use it in what I absolutely every day, like whether it's, the discipline or the attention to detail or the planning, even before the expo, like I need my list, I need my checklist, and if I can't find one, then I'll create one, or, different things that I find myself in. I'm always drawing back to my military experience, and I think that's so true with so many other aspects in life. We always go back to what we know.
Right.
And so if that's for somebody out there that is a veteran, what are they going to do? It's maybe what they experience or what they know from the military days. But when it comes to reading, it's just kind of interesting. As not saying that other psychics or mediums can't give veterans or whatever like interpretation, but sometimes when it gets into, it's interesting that it makes me reminds me of a reading, and I was doing in the western part of North Dakota. And there was a big muscly bound dude in the gallery, and it was interesting because the first individual in the spirit that stepped forward was a guy that had a very thick, like New York accent. And us in the Midwest, I know we butcher it all the time, like, how you doing? Kind of like the Joey from Friends, right? And it's always, but it's interesting as he was that stereotypical. And I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. But the first thing he was like, he wanted to get my attention of being very proud of the fact, because saying, I want you to understand that I'm a Marine, will always be a Marine. And I was like, ooh, I get that. Okay, like very proud, and I get it. Marine Corps is, to me, a little bit different. Like they have a little bit different energy and edge. And so me having that military background kind of reads different branches a little bit different, and also like, and then the first thing that he did is he talked about, he was like, I want you to know that like during World War II, he was very proud of the fact that while he was in the Marine Corps, that he was one of the flying Leathernecks. And I was like, wow. I was like, that is, and I was like, and so I was like, well, I'm just going to lead with that. And so the big muscly bound dude was like, and like yo, that's my Uncle Vinny or whatever, and I didn't expect it because here we are in the western part of the Midwest, and this guy with the thickest New York accent, and I was like, wow, that sounds just like the guy that I'm talking to. And he was like, yeah, that's my uncle. He was very proud Marine Corps veteran, and goes on to validate. And what is even more mind-blowing, Jodi, was I stopped all of a sudden, and I turned and looked at him, and there was a line of firefighters behind him with their hands on each other's back, like pushing him. And I was almost like out the door, and I was like, what's going on with that? And I was like, okay. And so I described to him, I said, what's going on? And I said that they tell me that they're protecting a brother, and that they couldn't protect everybody. And I was just telling him everything I was seeing him, and he started, this big guy started tearing up, and that just tells me, sometimes I still get goosebumps. I'm thinking about it. Is where he was originally, obviously from New York, and he used to be a firefighter. Well, he was a firefighter during 9/11, and lo and behold, that his unit was, and they pushed him out of the building, a bunch of their guys didn't make it. But it was also symbolic of I was still having his back. And and obviously that's very hard losing anybody, but the aspect of when you have that brotherhood or sisterhood of even people in combat or traumatic events like that, you're always, even though you're fighting something, whether you're fighting a fire or a building or trying to get people that are trapped or maybe engaged in combat or whatever, you want to know that even though you're focused on the job, doing what you need to do, that you're also focusing on the person to the left and right of you. And it's still going to tear you up, that even if you couldn't do absolutely everything that you could, or even if it was completely out of control, that is still going to tear you up, because it's like, well, maybe I could have done that. And I think that's the human condition. Survivor's guilt. Yeah, survivor's guilt, right? But the aspect of that brotherhood that crossed the threshold of the spiritual into the earth plane, I was like, I just sat there and I was like, holy shit! Like,
that's a wow.
Wow. It was a wow, and I was just like, wow. And he continued on, like talking. And now he at the time, I don't know what he does now, but he talked about being a mechanic now. He completely wanted to change jobs and everything on. So I guess going back to your question of do I use my, absolutely, because using my experience, do I know all the brand? No, but I have a more of a baseline. I think any veteran kind of could give you a flavor, at least of most branches, right? And each, just like every individual, each branch has its own vibration. Right. Everything has its own uniqueness. And so it's kind of interesting. So, but I want to make a very clear because everybody always asks, do you only read military people or their families? And I don't. It's because, the only reason that I go by military medium, and actually it was my wife's idea, was because it made up such a big part of my life. And it was like, keying back on the military aspect. So, going back that many years, it was like, at first, because I kind of pushed her off, I was like, that's stupid. Nobody's going to want, because I was still in that mindset of, kind of like, oh, that's kind of hokey. Nobody wants to be called a military medium. And then it was like, I'll just go with psychic medium Dean McMurray. And that worked for a number of years. And then maybe 3 years in, I was like, I felt the urge, or spirit urge, maybe like, you need to rebrand. And I was like, okay. And I sat with it and I was like, you need to go with military medium. And I was like, and I was like, you're gonna laugh. And she goes, why? And I was like, and I told her, and she was like, should have listened to me, could have saved a lot of money from the beginning, right? And I was like, yeah, It's interesting because of when I kind of came out with that tagline or the label, right? Of it's interesting, and even today and other days of people connect to the military aspect, whether you're a veteran or not. Everybody has a family member or knows somebody that was in the military,
Right.
and so whether they connect to that, it establishes a different type of bridge.
Right.
And it's really kind of interesting because it opened up a different dynamic that I couldn't even fathom at the time, and a lot of other opportunities from not only filming potential with TV and networks, but also other things. And so, it's kind of interesting because it's a little bit different flair to it, right? And I know that there's so many there's other mediums and psychics and yourself, and they have military backgrounds, so there's so many other military mediums out there, but it's kind of interesting that when I get to meet them and just even like today, I think about, if I would have changed my enlistment by months, I would have met, probably bumped into this guy that I give a reading to today, and we were talking about military background and stuff in the Army, and I'm like, God, we missed each other by, like, in our careers, like, different duty stations. And really, the military is such a small place, and it's really when I say brotherhood, I'm encompassing all sexes, but talking about, it really truly is a small place, whether it's you're talking about all branches. And, so I've just found it so fascinating to connect to people walking in or people such as yourself.
Right. Well, and that was for me. I saw your brand.
Right.
The military medium, and it's like, military, wait, what?
Right.
And that was the cue for me, too.
Right.
So that is where you're supposed to be.
Well, you're led to where you're supposed to be, right? So
Right.
I'm a big firm believer in that. So.
Well, I know we both have to get back to our tables.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we have people waiting for us, but I have one last question for you.
Yes.
Any angel experiences?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm going to share one story, one angel story with you. And in my readings, I'll call it coming out spiritually. I was kind of introduced to archangels, and I really resonated with archangels and everything. And so even in my readings, before I get into the mediumship aspect, I always tap into the angels. I work with them daily and everything else. So my quick big angel story is one Christmas, it was around November. And we were early Christmas setting up, the kids were little. And we had noticed that there was a lot of spirit activity, more than normal in the home.
Okay.
And I was still very much in the transition of military to civilian time, and I came home from work, and so me and the wife sat down in the evening. I said, who the hell is a spirit in the house? I was like, and she said, well, you're the medium, shouldn't you be connecting? And I was so I got quiet, and I was like, well, I started connecting to this young man that died by suicide, and a very sad story, and I described exactly what he was wearing, and my wife started crying, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And she said, I never told you this story, but she goes, growing up in rural North Dakota, she goes, there was a kid that me and a few friends used to play with, and he was battling with his own demons at a very young age, and unfortunately took his own life. And she said, I went over to his home when the cops were there, and they were taking out the body, and I said, oh my God, we've been married how many years, and you never, and she was like, I kind of put it out of my mind, you don't think about that stuff. And she said, well, what does he want? And he's talking about the Christmas tree. And so to kind of give everybody a picture of what I'm talking about is we have a 4-level split home.
Okay.
And there's kind of a banister that goes up to the bedroom area from the living room, and there's kind of a little nook that we put the Christmas tree. And to get around to the back, either you got to go up the stairs to look at it, or you got to wedge yourself in between the banister, right? And to get back there, and he goes, and he was standing behind the Christmas tree, pointing at the back of it, going, I really like your angel. And I was like, now, I don't know about you, Jodi, but, most of the ornaments, I remember where we get them from. So it's like, oh, we picked that up when our daughter turned 1. We get it from mom, or you get those little trinkets that you hang, or this contraption was made by the kids in kindergarten. You put them all those fun memories. And so he kept on talking about this angel, and I was like, angel ornament. And so I get back behind and I'm looking, and I pull it off the tree, and I'm looking at it. Here it was probably a 4 to 6 inch clear plastic angel playing a harp. It was nothing. In fact, on the bottom it said "Made in China," and it was just a run of of course it did. And I hold it up, and my wife's sitting on the couch, and I said, "When did we get this?" And she was like, "I have never seen that." And I was like, holy shit, is this an apport, like a manifestation of a physical object? And I was like, and I just, covered in goosebumps, and I was like, and I just held it, and I was like I said, this isn't ours. Like, I was confused, like, it's on our tree, but it's not ours. And she was like, well, whose is it? And I'm not going to use their real names, but I always use the name of the Shakers. And so they live an hour north of us. And the husband and wife lost a child, after giving birth. And so, and of course, obviously very difficult, as it would be for anybody. And every year the hospital does a memorial for children that were lost, whatever. And so they went on to have 2 very healthy, happy children. And of course, kids got older. They had school programs for the holidays, and so they couldn't go to that memorial because of the school holiday play. And long story short, I was supposed to mail out this ornament to them because that's where it was supposed to go. And I procrastinated. Not that I've ever done that before. I always say divine timing. That's why I was telling my wife, it's divine timing. And but so I hurried up, brought it down. After it sat around for about a week, I got it in the mail. And they came home that night just totally bummed out that they couldn't go to that memorial service. Mm-hmm. What was waiting for them when they got home was that angel ornament. And talking about the timing, and a few days later my wife got an email from her saying, angels among us, and she said we knew exactly who they were from because all she did was from a friend. Okay. Because she was like, what the hell am I supposed to do? The dead person showed up, and it was interesting that how spirit worked through us, and that's why I always say we're all vessels. Yes. It depends how we're, what you're being asked or called to do. So whether it's just a kind gesture or a smile, or that's why I always ask people like, well, how are you being called today? What are you being called to do today? Right. And every one of us is being called. So, but it was interesting that just how a positive impact. And I'm like, I looked at my wife and I go, holy shit, they make Hallmark movies out of the experiences like this. And I was like, whoa, I was like, that is so cool. And I was like, that's why we do. And when I looked at it, I was like, that's why I do it. I was like, all the other stuff is residual. That's it. And it's kind of like, I call them God winks. Yes. And it's kind of like, the universe, God, Spirit, Gus is winking and going, see? And you said those little miracle moments and go, a positive impact. But I needed your help because we needed something physical, but to, that they're not alone. And I think that's just so the angel is working in that aspect as well. And so that's my angel story.
I love it.
So
thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Jodi. Thanks once again.
So glad you could be on.
Oh, it's great getting to know you and being here, sharing space with you.
I have a feeling we'll talk more.
Oh, we will.
Yes. So, and there you go, everybody. Activate your angels.
Thanks again for joining Chaplain Jodi on Survivor Angels. For more information, go to chaplainjodi.me. That's chaplainjodi.me. And on Facebook at Survivor Angels-Chaplain Jodi. Sound effects for the show created by Andre Opate and provided by Pixbay. This is Dave Schrader. Until next time, sending you off to activate your angels.